Welcome, I'm Jim, and today we're going to be talking about, well, you. Who are you? What do you want? At its onset, Star Citizen was described to us as a destination and not a one off story. Now, while I'm sure there will be in game content to grind and in game dev created events, I imagine, based off the devs' comments, that you, the players, will be largely responsible for setting the narrative of our shared universe and experience. It will be your actions that determine what's right and what's wrong. But a word of caution for anyone that's never played in a sandbox as open as I believe Star Citizens will be: who you are in the real world may not be who you decide to become in this virtual one. You may set off with every intent to recreate your real world persona into a virtual one. But as I found out in the only other game close enough in scope to Star Citizen, who I thought I'd be and who I became couldn't have been further apart from one another. Now, I thought, in my infancy in that universe, that I'd dedicate my time to becoming an industrialist. I'd be expressing and flexing my in-game might through the expansive economic and industrial systems that were available to me. If you had told me I'd become enamored with living in one of the most desolate and demanding areas of space, that I'd be spending every waking moment in game looking for that next big dopamine rush that could only be filled with a large space battle, that I'd spend years chasing a rush and an addiction that would become harder and harder to feel, well, I would have laughed at you. I knew what I was going to be. I wasn't some griefer looking for a fight or gank around every corner. I was going to build things. I was going to produce the ships that the game couldn't function without. But what I really was wrong. Because something within me that not even I was aware of was about to be unearthed, and nothing could ever hope to bury it again. So there I was, starting my dreams of being an industrialist. But how? How do I break into this role with so many already established with a strong foothold in this arena? Every spreadsheet I created told me I couldn't even be turning a profit to try and compete against these absolute titans of industry. But then I realized I simply would do what they didn't have to do. And in my desperation, that I would do what they were unwilling to do. I would have to set up my industry in an unprotected system, and thus freeing myself from the greed of corporate and system taxes, allowing me to be profitable. I was already stepping foot onto a slippery slope that I couldn't even begin to see. I was starting a life in an area of space with no idea of how it was going to affect me. Now, I'd largely accomplished my goals in a much shorter time frame than I had thought that I would. I had identified a niche in the market that would allow me to become very profitable, but it would be very time consuming to do. So I ended up spending far more time in this unprotected system than I had ever imagined that I would need to. So I did what anyone else would do. I started to explore, and on occasion, I would find people that were aggressive to me, and I had to fight and defend myself. Now, sometimes I lost. Oftentimes in the beginning, I lost. But I found that if I fight them, they left me alone. All they really wanted was a fight, and seemingly after they got their fight, they would leave my system. So it seemed to me the easiest way to protect myself was to just fight the people looking for a fight. I even developed some friendships this way. I'd have people that would pester me, and I could call these people back in, and they would help me remove them from my system. But I was so new to the game, and I felt like I was becoming so rich so early on. The only thing I really had to spend money on was to buy better ships, win more fights. And within just 6 months, I would go from some wide-eyed, eager industrialist to a cutthroat pirate living in a depth of space that most pilots couldn't even understand the appeal of. The game devs themselves never imagined that people would be stubborn enough to call this space home. Now, the unprotected system I lived in was considered a low tier of unprotected systems. So I started researching into the higher tier organizations that were functioning inside of this space. I found one that I was interested in. I applied. I interviewed. I got in. I think it was only a day or two before we had one of our first big fights that I had ever been a part of. And at that moment, I was hooked. I'd never go back to anything else. And I stayed with that same org for the next 4 years. But here we were, trying to tame this wild land of exploration, and for a time, we were seemingly on top. So again, maybe I'm asking the wrong questions. Maybe I shouldn't be asking, who are you? Maybe I'm asking, who will you become? Now, maybe you believe me or maybe you don't. But I think the answer to that question is you won't know yet. You can't know yet. It's akin to asking a kid what will they do for the rest of their life. It's an unfair question. How could they possibly know? They've experienced so little. Let's say you're the type of person that ordinarily would never imagine yourself volunteering to be a fleet commander. And here you are involved in another space battle, like so many before you'd been in. Only this time, the enemy fleet found out who your fleet commander was, so they primaried that ship and removed them from the battlefield. They're no longer on the field of battle. They have no ability to call any shots or give any directions to the fleet. Now you feel an obligation to your org mates amidst all this chaos and awkward silence on comms. You'll step forward and lead your group to victory or at least safety. Your role within that org will never be the same again. Your path in the universe may have just diverted forever. The person you were and the person you've realized you could become were never the same. Few people set out in life to be liars or org thieves, but after years of building trust within your org, you're promoted to a role that grants you access to billions in credits and assets. Will you throw away everything you've worked for at an easy payday? You could take everything from them and never have to grind away for another credit for as long as you play this game. In the game I played, most stayed loyal to their orgs, but some took the easy way out. And I'd bet you my fleet that the majority of them that ended up stealing never would have imagined when they started playing the game that they would betray everyone that had come to depend on them so heavily for an easy payday. The game largely gets broken down into who you think you are versus who the group that you fly with needs you to become. It's going to challenge you in ways that you never thought a game could. Do you break out of your shell? Do you try the hard thing? Or do you just reserve yourself and say, no, that's not who I am. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. I won't do that. But sometimes the need is so great that you'll just sit there and say, screw it. Let's see what happens. In Star Citizens, few choices will be black and white. Most of the choices we really will have to make will be varying shades of gray. We like to think we know how we react to a situation presented to us. But until we're actually faced with it, all we can do is just guess and assume. So I'm interested to see. Take some time and comment below. Who are you and what do you want? Thanks for joining me again today. And as always, see you in the verse.